This is my conviction. What is happening to it?
You know why you do it. You don't do it because you get paid well. You don't do it because men love you. You do it because you love men, and because more than that, you want to honor God.
This is Protestia Tonight.
Hello, and you are tuned into Protestia Tonight for Saturday, March 22nd, 2025. This is the program that we hope will be glorifying to God, convicting the sinners, and edifying to the saints. A program with sincere questions and biblical answers. Thank you for tuning in. This program brought to you, as all of them are, by our wonderful and intrepid and awesome insider supporters. You can be one of them by going over to patreon.com/Protestia, joining up for $5.95 a month and up, different tiers of awesomeness over there at Patreon. You'll get ad-free browsing on the website and all sorts of other awesome goodies by being a Protestia insider. Also go to protestia.com and sign up for the Insurgency email blast. And that'll get you 3 days a week of what we call banned news links, curated news links in your inbox. There's a paid plan for that get I think it's like $7 a month that will get you 6 days a week. Or the secret is send us a message on Patreon in the messages and say you want to be added. We can add you to the 6 day week, a 6 day week version, 6 days a week version for free. So if you're doing the math, that's about $1.05 of savings. This episode of Protestia Tonight, we're going to be discussing, I was really hoping we could kind of get past this stuff, but Reformed Twitter. What I learned over the past couple of days is Reformed Twitter, much like they have not, much like a lot of us didn't have our theology fully formed on Romans 13 and governing authorities around the COVID time. It's come to our attention now. Reformed Twitter is similarly underdeveloped when it comes to ecclesiology, when it comes to church's authority, when it comes to qualifications for pastoral ministry, and being made most obvious, I would say, in the pushback and all of that over Pastor Joel Webbon's 12-year-old sin being exposed for all to see. I have my issues with it. My cohort and partner in crime, JD Hall, has his issues with it. And, I've been pushing back on it a lot today, and we're going to be discussing it, bringing the Bible to bear, and also discussing it in contrast to other recent, what I would say are church discipline, pastoral qualifications cases. I want to talk a little bit about Steve Lawson, if JD is so amenable, potentially talk about what happened with him and his church, which a lot of you know about, of course, kind of the details of that. And then also talk about the impropriety. And really, I'll just be honest with you, this has gotten really under my skin the past couple of days, this idea that it is ever an appropriate tactic to take against our theological opponents, who we consider brothers, apparently. Reportedly, we consider them brothers, to drag out long ago repented and forgiven sin for the purpose of smearing their name on the internet. That really, I'm not sure exactly how to say it. That really bugs me a lot. It really, and maybe it's my experience here at Protestia and my personal affection for JD and what I know he's gone through and how church discipline can go sideways, and also, quite honestly, my conviction that the Bible does not delineate a hard and fast, black and white, always works for everybody standard for being permanently disqualified from pastoral ministry. And so I want to discuss it biblically. I want to discuss some of the specifics of these issues. But before we get into that, and before we introduce our partner in crime, Insight to Insight's own JD Hall, beginning of every Protestia Tonight, we talk about the gospel. It's really, none of this matters. None of this makes any difference. Church discipline doesn't matter. Pastoral qualifications don't matter. How we are to approach the issues of forgiveness, repentance, in any sort of biblical sense makes no difference at all if you don't know Jesus Christ. You are still lost and dead in your trespasses and sins, and you will be going to hell. And none of the good deeds you do, none of the great ecclesiology you can apply, none of the loving church discipline that you can bring to bear, none of the protecting supposedly others on Twitter or social media from these awful online pastors, none of that's going to matter if you do not know the Savior. And that starts by knowing the bad news. You and I, anybody who is born aside from Christ himself, was born into sin, inheriting a rebellious and sinful nature from our father Adam, and are every bit deserving of hell. This is what makes salvation and repentance such a miraculous occurrence. Salvation, such a miraculous occurrence, is we can't possibly make a move towards God under our own power, but God so loved the world so much, he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to be born of a virgin, to live a perfect life and earn righteousness on our behalf that he could not, that we could not earn. And then he traded that for a death on the cross in our place, paying the price to the Father for our sins. And if you place your faith, hope, and trust in Jesus Christ, repent of your sins, turn from your wicked ways, trust in him for salvation. Salvation is a free gift. It's a biblical promise. And yeah, we'll drop anything around here at Protestia to talk to you about that as much as we are talking about all of these other things at the same time. That matters. Now, I'm going to be we're going to have actually for this Protestia tonight, we're going to have another gentleman adding us. I see he's sort of getting into the to the chat right now, or I guess into the video stream at this point, to talk about some of these issues. Hopefully this winds up being a fruitful and lively and interesting discussion for everybody. He's still connecting, but while he's connecting, I want to say hi to Insight's JD Hall, who is waiting very patiently. He's not that patient of a guy sometimes, but he is waiting for me to get through all of the what do we call it? Is this the is this what we would call the housekeeping portions of all of this? I think that's what
I suppose. I suppose. You know, it was 3 a.m. in the morning on Thursday. I'm sending you, hey, this is how our next episode ought to go in terms of the various segments. And then I wake up from this glorious snap today, and I see that you posted on X that we're talking about everything you just said that we're talking about. I'm like, I didn't sign up for this.
Well,
I gotta see, I'm in a tough spot because, you know, that the fifth commandment doesn't end like just because you're 18, right? So I get a text from my dad today that says, son, I hope this finds you doing better with your medical issues. I've had shingles and stuff recently. Says, take good care of yourself. I'm concerned about the friction in your exchanges on media. Avoid making new enemies or stirring up the old ones. I fear someone with the purpose and means will come after you. Don't take chances. So, you know, my dad's worried about me because of, in the last couple of days. So I did the episode, the last one with you, David, and I took just a moment, like maybe 2 minutes, and looked into the camera, and I'm like, we know this is coming. Please don't engage in this. Don't drag up old sins, please, in order to beat someone with them. You know, we kind of I feel like I know who it was. It's a very short list, as I wrote it insight to insight last night. The list is so short of possible culprits that I can count them on one hand, even if I had blown off a few fingers in a fireworks stand. And we know that on that very short list are just a few people that hate Joel Webbon, and they've done this type of thing before. So, like, I don't. And in terms of the permanent disqualification thing, we'll see where that conversation goes. But I mean, I was hoping to talk about. Well, I don't remember what I sent you. Maybe it was like demons possessing computers or something. It was something I had written at Insight to Insight. So, you know, I'm trying to maintain my happy place. I don't want to leave my happy place and get involved in all this nonsense.
Well, and I don't particularly want to discuss this in terms, because here's the thing. Like, I spent a good amount of today while I was working, doing other things, trying to type about as fast as I could into Twitter chats, X chats, to try to explain my position on this, or I would argue Protestia's position on this, which really, it's not so much about defending any specific pastor. or anybody's specific doctrine, but it is about defending the validity, or really I guess I would say the sanctity of a local church's authority under Christ to choose their own leadership, delegate their own leadership, to apply the standards for biblical leadership as they see fit. And so I'm looking at this situation with Joel Webbon. And I mean, as you know, like all of the information that was in this letter, that was his response that I put up at protestia.com, all of that I think both of us have known for some time. And he basically has given that information to his prior church elders, to the board of his parachurch ministry, to his current church elders, to like anybody that would ever have skin in the game, including, I would argue, people he didn't need to tell it to particularly, like people that might show up at one of his conferences. And so he's kind of gone above and beyond to tell people, look, this is what's going on. This is the issue. If you're not comfortable with that, I'm telling you now, so you check out of this conference you might be a part of before somebody tries to slime you with this. So it seems like we have everybody in this guy's life that would have any spiritual authority over him saying this has been adjudicated in some cases for years. The 2023 seems like confusion in between himself and his church, his prior church in San Diego, being worked out in transparently with the board of his ministry. I mean, like I know some people don't like AD Robles, but I like him, and I trust him if he tells me this is what happened, and he has. That, like, that's a big hurdle for people to try to jump over who not connected with this from Twitter, from social media. That's, to try to re-adjudicate what has already been decided by the church, and in the process dishonor and disrespect the forgiveness and repentance and the reconciliation offered to him by the people who actually were sinned against. I'm sorry, like, I don't know how else to say it. That offends me as a believer. Like, if you sin against me and I offer repentance and reconciliation, and I say, look, JD, it's forgotten about. And then people jump on the internet and say, you know what? I'm going to jump in and I'm going to declare that David's forgiveness and reconciliation with him is invalid. And we're going to throw it out because we know better.
Yeah.
Like, they don't know better.
Yeah.
They don't.
Just to set some boundaries for what I'm going to say tonight. I'm not going to get into it with James or Jeff in this, so I guess what I'm saying is, David, don't try to drag me into clips that are going to be used by some idiot on YouTube to get me in a fight with James White. That said, I mean, I can talk more broadly about the issue. I would put it in the same category as my friend, Saitin Brudenkate, who, to my knowledge, and forgive me if I'm wrong on the facts, I never cared to look and pry into his situation, but it was something along the lines of an ungodly relationship, physical relationship. He's back. He's doing ministry. I saw him interacting with the same guys now attacking Joel Webbon over this. They didn't seem to mind him. And so I think there's two different issues. The first one is, if you are dealing with the situation within the confines of your local church or someone that's under your authority, how would you deal with this specific situation? And I think we all need to be wise enough to say, okay, there are times when I would deal with something differently in terms of a disciplinary issue. If this happened to a minister in my church, we ought to be able to separate that in our mind from then taking what we would do in our context with our ecclesiology and our understanding of church structure, and then just start applying it to others. At a certain point, you have to say, like, calm down. I'll give you an example. I spoke at a conference one time with Bob DeWay. Bob DeWay was really one of the OG polemicists, like a long time ago. And he fell into alcoholism. Apparently, it was so bad, he would be around his congregation with vodka in the water bottle. I thought, should I speak with this guy at this conference? Considering I think my opinion is he ought to be done.
Mhm.
But it's like, well, his church dealt with that. I don't necessarily agree with how his church dealt with that, but I don't disagree either because I wasn't there. I don't know the details, the conversations. I don't know any of that. So I'm going to kind of accept at face value the decision that was made by his church and realize no one's forcing me to make a judgment on Bob DeWay. No one's forcing me to make a judgment on Psy. No one's forcing me to make a judgment on Joel. I don't have to. That's what the local church is for. At the same time, I know that you don't believe in the concept of permanent disqualification. I do, but it's not because of biblical reasons. It's because of practical ones. If you
that's
said,
the thing is
JD,
that's actually what I believe about permanent disqualification. So what I'm trying to tell people on social media, and I think this is really important because in order to protect the biblical authority of the local church, we have to figure this out. Because if there's a standard for permanent disqualification that is black and white that applies in every situation, no matter what the circumstances are, then yeah, people would be safe in declaring somebody disqualified from over Twitter, right? The problem is there is no such qualification actually enumerated in Scripture, so you have to rely on the wisdom of the local church applied to the situation, or maybe like in your case, your conscience before the Lord. But there is no verse that says if an elder commits this sin, he may never be an elder ever again. It just isn't there. And so,
I think you would have people pretty angrily thump their Bible on above reproach and look at you and scream above reproach as though just saying the words is conveying a point of some kind. What does above reproach mean? And with whom? What does it mean to be blameless among whom necessarily? And so these are all conversations that I think we should have. And so I don't mind using the situation with Joel and those who I think very godlessly attacked him. Let me talk about that in just a moment. I'll come back to it. I think I'm comfortable using this as a springboard to talk about this other issue as it pertains to, these days, try finding a minister that hasn't fallen in some capacity. I mean, my goodness, there's a long list of dead bodies of ministers who have become disqualified one way or another. But I think that when we start talking about details on specific situations like Joel's, we're doing ourselves a disservice and undermining our own point, which is this is not the court of adjudication on that. It just isn't. God has appointed one. This isn't it. Now, Aaron Vineyard, whose name rings a bell. I think he was a pulpiteer years ago, or maybe I've just interacted with him a lot. He had a point that it wasn't a good point, but he did have a point that it requires, I think, some explanation. I tagged you in it, David. I don't know if you saw it, but he's saying, okay, so with Steve Lawson, you guys questioned that discipline. I don't know what his perspective is of that. Like I guess you could say we question the discipline. We really question the church structure as to whether or not discipline was even possible. I don't look at what we said as questioning his discipline, but okay. And that you questioned my discipline. Okay. Then why aren't we questioning Webbon's discipline? Well, a couple of things. The first one is in the case with Lawson and me, both, you did lean towards an embrace of the church's decision until you researched it yourself and found out more. We're taking the same position with Webbon. And as a matter of fact, we can be the first to say, if what we find out is not the case, if what we've been told is true is not true, although we've done due diligence on our own part, I'm pretty confident it is true. But if we found out differently, well, then our position would change just like it would with anyone else. I know that with what happened with me, it threw you guys for a real loop. I like the introduction you did on that first video that you did with me and Mandy 2 years ago, or whenever it was, going on 2 years ago, where you're like, it made us question, like, okay, the church is the court to decide such matters, but like, is that infallible? And how does all that work? These are sticky issues, obviously. But what I mean by saying, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice and undermining our point is we have no reason. There's no practical reason to question Joel Webbon if his church has made this decision. I think with me, you had to make a decision in terms of like, what do we do with JD because of our relationship? I don't have that.
People that had, that had some sort of, ministerial authority in your life, right?
If we were yoked in some capacity in ministry with Webbon, I think we would be more inclined to try to pry this open and look at stuff. That said, let me go back to the thing about the godlessness of all of this. When we have reported on clergy sexual misconduct in the past, Clayton Jennings is the best example, but there have been many. We did so because there was unrepentance, because there was something that truly did need to be exposed, because there was a cover-up, and there was something that was a pattern. I don't know that we have ever exposed a minister for some type of sexual sin a decade plus ago that has been dealt with in the church. Like, why would we ever, it wouldn't make it off the cutting room floor. It wouldn't be of any interest to us. With Clayton Jennings, there were 17 women that we know of that came forward who were shoved plan B in their mouth just in case they happened to get pregnant from a one-night stand after saying, hey, come up to my hotel room after the event so that we can pray together. Next thing you know, things happen. So we're talking real sexual predation on his part. But, in talking to the folks on Twitter, they're like, how's this different than Steve Lawson's? And I'm saying, you got to be Steve Lawson's situation. You got to be kidding me. Okay. Yeah. So, first of all, we're talking a very young man in ministry, a novice who shouldn't have been a pastor at the time, and someone who is aged and respected and old as dirt. We're talking not about someone having a relationship with a peer the same age, but we're talking about someone having a relationship with someone as young as his granddaughter, who was a family friend, who was seen as, frankly, I don't want to say she looked at him as a grandpa or an elder, but I mean, there was that type of family relationship here in which grooming, I'm not saying it happened, but it certainly would have been possible given the relationship that they had. With Joel, he confessed his sin because he was cut to the heart. He didn't have to be found out. Nobody had to put the screws to him. But most importantly, there wasn't a cover-up. Now, they're trying to allege that there was a cover-up because what happened with Acts 29 is they asked him about this is my understanding from what the due diligence and research that you and I have done. They asked him about his sexual past. He did confess sin. They didn't ask him how recent was it. They didn't ask him some of those questions. He did not at all lie to them, but he didn't advertise it. I don't know that he should have, although they probably should have asked. And at that point, obviously, he should have been honest. I think we can all say, well, maybe we can't all say. I think you and I can say that required more discipline than what he received, right? I mean, yeah, I think it required more discipline.
Yeah, more than likely, I would
than what it received. But there was not a cover-up. His board knows this. His church knows this. That church knew this. My understanding is it wasn't like everyone in his new church was told, but like according to their ecclesiology, the head of every household was told about this. The men in their church, because they're patriarchists and misogynists and sexist. So he told the men about it, and all of that. So this is not at all similar to what happened with Steve Lawson. But even when it comes to someone like Greg Locke, who I think, I buried the hatchet with Greg. I don't want to dive back into that necessarily. I'll just say, I think that what he did was disqualifying. I think what he did was permanently disqualifying. His church disagrees. His church put him back into ministry. So now if I criticize him, and I probably won't, to be honest, it's not going to be about that anymore. That's not an issue anymore. Now I'm going to talk about some crazy thing he says when he preaches. I'm not going to talk about that issue. It's beating a dead horse. And I talked about this on Webbon's program with in regard to Tom Buck, or was it Gabriel Hughes? I forget who it was, bringing up Mark Driscoll and, his situation at Mars Hill. And I'm saying to myself, at a certain point, can we just stop beating this dead horse? Because what it appears like, what it appears as to the onlookers, to the people who are either lost or they're nominal Christians, is that what we Christians really like doing is discovering some kind of sin and then beating them with it. But what was done to Joel was definitely in the godless category, but it was also in a different category. And I'm going to call that the lame category. What Eli thought he did was produce some kind of gotcha, like, look what I found, and that's dossier. That's right. That's how I found out about it, is because he's a terrible sleuth. He was sloppy. He was loud. We knew that it was coming because we could hear the weeds, the reeds rustling. We knew that was coming, but he exposed something that was already exposed. Now, not to the world at large. Why humiliate his wife? Like, why bring that crap up? But among the board and his church and the people that need to know, they knew. Furthermore, the reason why he had this letter is because Joel had sent it years after he was obligated to.
A guy.
Yeah.
He
sent it to.
I think Tim played some audio or something.
Yeah, he sent it
on
to.
His end.
Tim's
in the green room.
He sent it to like basically anybody that would have done ministry alongside him that may not have been aware.
Right.
So
just to summarize, and I'll hand it.
But Doug Wilson knew, Jeff Durbin knew, James White knew, and the time
and Joe
frame.
Boot. So take your pick.
Joe Boot, and the time frame matters here. And this is like, we don't have time to dig back into all of this, but the time frame between when these men would have had this information and then went sideways with Joel Webbon over the Tobias Riemenschneider thing and the Antioch Declaration and all that, and this moment, that makes a difference. Right. So, and to be fully in full disclosure, I want to make this point. The board of Right Response Ministries, A.D. Robles is on this board, but also Gabe Wrench, who's a Moscow guy, he's a Doug Wilson guy, is also on this board. So I have a really hard time thinking it came from there. I think there's too much of a connection there, in my opinion, for that to have ever been a possibility. I might be wrong.
The last statement of my summary, and then I'll hand it back over to you. If I could just describe the lameness. So he sends out a letter. Just picture it in your mind for a second. Let's make it simple. Hey, just so you know, 12 years ago, I committed this sin. And he sends it out. Eli gets a hold of it, and he's like, drum roll, please. I've got a big reveal. He committed this sin 12 years ago. And the rest of us are looking at it like, no kidding. He advertised it. This is not a secret. It's like if I had a big expose and I'm like, okay, I'm going to reveal something really big. Now hold on to your britches. This is going to be a scandal. All right. Now this is going to be, okay. Here we go. Buckle up. Rick Warren is not sound in his theology. Right? You'd go, yeah. Like, clearly, we've read his material. We know this. It might be slightly different because it's like you and I didn't know. Why would we? That's pretty silly. And so someone tried to make an argument, and it was an argument, to be fair. I don't know that it was a good one, but it's like, well, we all have a right to know this because we're giving money. The people that donate should have the right to know. And I'm thinking to myself, number one, I really don't think there's anybody that's been given money that cares. I really don't. I just don't see that as a real thing. Like, who's going to say, I supported him up until this, but he had relations 12 and a half years ago with someone who was not his wife because he didn't have a wife at the time. Like, I don't think that's really a thing. But also, who gives to a ministry under the presumption that someone has reached sinless perfection? I don't think that happens either. So, are you entitled because you give money to someone to know every single sinful, disgusting, wicked thing that they've done? I really don't think so. I am privy to this, though, and I didn't share this at my Insight to Insight yesterday. I am well aware of some very prominent ministers that you and I think highly of, who the people criticizing Joel think very highly of, who Joel told about this. And their responses were something along the lines of, and one very prominent minister who has, people look at him very favorably, and they should, because he's very sound and one of the most prominent guys in our camp in the world, and I mean globally, said, so what you're telling me, Joel, is you're a sinner? So I see the people flipping out over this, and I'm like, let's be honest, these people hated Joel to begin with. Right. They're using this as just these same people were saying he was unqualified yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. Now they just have another reason to say that.
Well, and the arguments being made at this point are they revolve around one of two things. It's either the claim that, well, there's some sort of an elevated standard for what is or isn't sin, in terms of disqualification from ministry, when someone claims to be a pastor or is called a pastor, or is, so we're seeing screenshots now of like, well, the vineyard said he was a pastor on their website and all this kind of stuff. Like, you people not familiar with how these church planting organizations work, or Crew, or any of these other kind of things here? Well, you'll have your own page on their website, and it'll be full of puffery about your vision and your inspiration and all these things, and they call you these things, but you might be a total joke. That's how it happened back then, and still does.
I'd really encourage people to check out what I read, or what I wrote rather, at Insight to Insight, and also I had a post on X last night about this. If you could understand the milieu of 2010 to 2012, 2013, Young, Restless, and Reformed, this was when I was at Pulpit and Pen, and I'm complaining about this exact same type of thing. That these guys, they're changing their doctrine all the time. Nothing huge, but it's like you should already be settled in your doctrine if you're going to be calling yourself a church planter. Everyone was a church planter. Everyone and their cousin was a church planter. By that, they meant that they had a Bible study somewhere. They met at Starbucks. The method of church planting engaged in was that the church plant exists even like as an idea before it's actually a church. That's why we call it a church plant and not a real church. I sat through the church planting seminars and trainings called Basic Training for Church, or Boot Camp for, Basic Training for Church Planters, put on by the North American Mission Board, where, they kind of lay out this novel ecclesiastical process where it's like, you're now the pastor of a church. You don't have any members. If you build it, they will come. Put the ad in the paper, call the church, even though there's no one here, right? So Paul Washer, as a matter of fact, was talking to me one time, and he was explaining why that was unbiblical. And what he's saying is, okay, so what happens is you preach the word, people get saved. Literally, Christ builds his own church. It's not that I'm going to get a logo and a design and put up a sign and then advertise it and say this is a church, and then people will come and hear the gospel. Point is, I don't like what happened in that whole YRR niche back then. I was complaining about the Reformed pub type thing, short on holiness, changing doctrines frequently, focus on being cool and hip and all that nonsense. Well, yeah, and that's what happened. That's what happened to Joel. He was a part of that, and he came out. Thankfully, he seems to have matured. Other older people seem to have put it in reverse and backed up into it. Point is, I don't think our position hinges on whether or not he was a pastor technically. Because if somebody wanted to say, but he was a pastor, and there was a website that called him a pastor, okay, I don't care. I don't care. Yeah, my argument is not based upon an ecclesiastical,
Technicality.
Yeah, technicality. That's the word I'm looking for. Like it's not. This isn't an argument based on technicality of any of those specific details. It's, you know what? That's not my church, not my farm, not my pig, not my problem. Like that's in the meantime, everybody else is looking at this going, okay, I think Joel came out smelling pretty good from all of this. At one guy on X, I kind of had to chuckle, said, yeah, reading this, like he's an angel compared to me. Let me tell you about myself.
Yeah. Well, and I could point to myself and say the same is true with me. I mean, you have the, whether you want to call it a blessing or a curse or whatever, of people in the public knowing more about you than would ordinarily be the case. They don't know that about me. I mean, if people saw into my heart or knew my past, they would, I mean, would I get similarly trolled all over the internet? You know,
I'll tell you right now that when there is a single minister who's engaged, an engaged minister, I'm going to guess less than 50% make it to the altar of virgin, because they tell themselves this lie in their head: this is going to be my spouse. You know, so what is it? I'm not excusing it. That's horrific. It's wrong. It's terrible. But like, grow up. We have to learn how to deal with sin, because this is not abnormal. This is not out of the ordinary. It's wicked. It's sin. It's transgression. It's wrong. This is very commonplace. You can't have this type of freak out every time you're confronted with sin. I'm not making light of sin. I'm telling you that you have to deal with it better than this. You just do.
And the thing is, like, I think we know, I think this is a fair statement, that most of the people that are really pushing, whether he was a pastor, whether he's not a pastor, any of these little details, already were his opponents, right? They already were his opponents. And I'm looking at this saying, okay, this should not change whether or not you are able to challenge his doctrine or his behavior or whatever you disagree with. Like challenge that. Go to it, whatever he's doing now, and challenge it. You don't need to dig up his repented of and forgiven past to get out of, to be lazy and get out of the doctrinal work you need to do to actually explain why he's bad. And that would be true with any of us. Like, it's the analogy is not true that, well, when we put people on Protestia like a Joel Osteen or something like that, we're doing anything similar to this. We're not. We are exposing what he's teaching now, unrepentant, wolf in sheep's clothing. If that's true about Joel Webbon, you do not have the permission to go back and do his repented past and use this as a get out of discernment free card.
Okay. So Daryl Harrison is divorced, right? My opinion is he's unqualified to be a pastor. That's that. In other words, if I was in his church, he got a divorce at any point, I'd say, I don't think you're qualified to be a pastor.
And you would have a choice at that point as a congregant in that church to vote against him, maybe get outvoted. And then if you're not comfortable with that, you probably have to leave, right? Or you could make your case to the rest of the church, and they might say, you know what, JD, we agree with you. And then they wouldn't make him a pastor, right?
I mean, you could also just submit to the will of the church and humbly presume, until you get further direction from the Holy Ghost, that Jesus Christ was in on that decision. And we know that doesn't always work that way, but we're to presume that at least from the get-go. All that said, man, let me tell you, I think that one aspect of this that people are overlooking is that those who seem most upset about this particular issue are gravitating towards the Me Too, Church Too methodology and argumentation. You know, it's like we've noticed Doug Wilson is starting to tweet an awfully lot like Neil Shinvey. It's like you start noticing people moving away from their previous positions, moving towards, a lot of what polemics is just noticing someone's
Right.
noticing someone's trajectory, like where they headed. They may not be there yet, but where are they headed? That's a big part of polemics. And to see people argue that, well, this is abuse, and if he was in a different state, this could have been, I don't even want to say it, what they're alleging. And it's like, well, he was a pastor, she was a congregant, this is abuse. And it's like, okay, understand where I'm coming from. My wife was a member of a church in which I was a pastor. Now, to be fair, she wasn't like a youth, and I was a youth pastor. She's just a couple months younger than me, practically the same age. But it's like, so, and how many ministers meet their wife who was a congregant as they were a single minister? Is that rape? Is that seedy? Well, he leveraged his unequal power dynamic okay, listen, had they gotten married, you wouldn't have called this abuse. All right. Furthermore,
and the thing is, like, she wasn't.
It's absurd.
Wasn't Joel Webbon's wife a bridesmaid at this woman's marriage?
I don't want to. Let's not go down that road. I don't know how much of that's. I don't know how much of that is out.
I think that's all out in the open. I really do. Like that's out in the open.
No, point is they maintain a relationship. Right. The ladies maintain a relationship to this day. It's a positive, healthy relationship. The restoration of the relationships
are all solid by any measure,
right?
Any bit of evidence.
And that's the point. It's like these people have reconciled. What's your problem?
And now you have supposed conservatives out there saying there might be abuse, clergy abuse. Get real.
You know what, Charles Stanley. You know what? I like Charles Stanley. I really do. I find him edifying. His son, okay, it's the opposite of that. I don't think he should be a pastor. He got divorced. But like, it's not a controversy. It's just not. Let it go. It's not your thing. And so my advice to those guys is just move forward. Like the criticism out of that camp has been so beyond the pale godless for so long, out of jealousy and envy and spite. And I'm sure this is reason 5,221. I am judging from afar again. But this is because they've been trying to shut up Joel Webbon and Eric Kahn and William Wolf and Stephen Wolf and AD and John Harris. They've been trying to get them banned, blacklisted, boycotted, and shut down. No one has listened to them. And so it's like, well, now I'm really going to capitalize on this. Well, you know what?
And for the record,
no one cares.
For the record, 2 seconds ago, when those guys were smaller in their influence, none of these dudes had a problem with them. They were all doing podcasts with them and supporting him and reposting their stuff and all that. And then something flipped, and I don't think it was the doctrine, because you and I both know there are plenty of things we would disagree with all those guys, right? We would go toe to toe on doctrinal issues with all the guys you listed on something, and maybe something even significant. But the last thing I'm going to do is say, well, I can't defeat them in the arena of ideas, or I can't be edifying and explain, for instance, why I'm pre-mill and I think post-mill is the wrong position on eschatologically. So I'm going to go see if I can dig up some dirt in their past, so I don't even have to have the argument. I'm just going to chop them off at the knees and let the Twitter piranhas take them down. When is that ever okay? I just,
So, to segue a little bit, Tim Hurd is with us. I can only assume what you guys are going to talk about. Again, let me say, I'm glad you guys are having the conversation. It's just that, I'm in a good place. I'm happy. I don't want this garbage in my life. My dad says not to get in a fight. I don't want to get into a fight because I love him. I love my dad and I want to obey him. It is frustrating. I'll just say this, to watch what they have done to Tim Hurd after all this time go completely unanswered. When in our comm box yesterday that you and I have with some other people, Seth Dunn is also there. And the question is, how do you know for sure that it was Jeff Durbin or someone within his orbit that released this to Eli? And of course, I don't know for sure. That's why I said allege. All right. Look up the definition of the word. But it's because, again, it's a very short list of people who had this specific letter. It's even a shorter list. Like, I'm down to like 3 names of people who hate Joel who had it. And he's done it over and over and over again. So anyways, in my interaction with Jeff yesterday, and he comes on, he calls me Mr. Hall as an insult, right? It's one of those passive aggressive. You're not a pastor, Mr. Hall, Mr. Hall. Okay. So he's doing that, and he's throwing my sin in my face, which is fine, whatever. But I respond to him and say, I bring up Tim Hurd, and I bring up all the members in his church where he secretly recorded them and their confessions of sin and then later used it to berate them, to beat them, to lambaste them. And he denies it. He denies it. And Seth said, I was kind of open-minded about whether or not he's guilty of doing this. But when I saw him just outright lie and about doing this in the past in relation to Tim and these other church members, Seth said, anybody that would just lie that bluntly and boldly about it, like, okay, I think he did it too. And that's, maybe he didn't. I don't know. An allegation doesn't mean that you have proof. It means you assume that you assume they did it. It makes sense. And I tell you what, I've not seen Jeff Durbin or that camp rebuke the leaking of confidential information over a matter that has been adjudicated in the ecclesiastical court more than 12 years ago, properly repented of by an effeminate guy like Eli McGowan. If you appear to be cheering this on from the shadows, you're totally cool with this doesn't concern you at all. Sometimes it's not just what you say, it's what you don't say. So I smell a rat, and, I could be wrong, but in all of my disagreements with James White and Jeff Durbin so far, I've not been yet. So there's a first time for everything. We'll see.
Yeah. And I'm not sure, because really it doesn't match entirely any other ecclesiology that I've ever seen from any other like known minister, but to Jeff Durbin, and he did this to Tim. We're going to talk about it here in a minute, but to Jeff Durbin, once Tim confessed sin to him, it was forgiven. Supposedly reconciliation supposedly happened. In Jeff's mind, Tim remains a slanderer. Tim remains a liar. He remains, and this is now who he is. And so any future interaction is based off of this. To Jeff Durbin, you're still a drug addict, and you're still a whatever else he thinks you did over time. And he reserves the right as an elder, he reserves the right to always treat you that way. And if you ever offend him in the slightest, he will demand to talk to your elders and tell you, well, that Jordan Hall is an embezzler and he's a this and a drug addict and all these things. And Tim Hurd, he's a slanderer because he did this one thing against me back in the day. Like, it's so narcissistic
really sad
and immature and abusive that I can't believe anybody would ever side with that.
I think it's sad. It's very sad that apparently this tactic of, I want to talk to your elders, has worked for him in the past, that he thinks it will work for him in the future. I don't want to beat that dead horse. Go read my Substack on this entitled Have Your Elder Call My Elder. You can find it Insight to Insight. You and I did a podcast about this subject, didn't we?
We might have. There's also a related article over at Protestia called Rubbing Salt in the Wounds, talking about this and the Steve Lawson issue, and this idea that parachurch ministries are somehow beneath the church that I mean, it's a similar related issue to this.
Well, it's like, pastors are not hall monitors. Okay. They're not, everyone is a cult who is going to censor their church members because they offended you.
Mhm.
Okay. That, like, not every church is its own nanny state, Jeff. That's just not how it works. Anyways, I don't want to rail on that all night. What I'm going to do is, David, I'm going to bounce out of the conversation a little bit. I'm going to give you time with Tim. I mean, I might chime in, but again, if let me say this: if you're one of my readers or whatever, don't go get me in a fight with these guys. That's not what I want to do. I really don't. Even when I see James just berate me on the dividing line, like I don't really want to get involved in that. Go pick a fight for somebody else. I just don't care to have a part of that.
So we have on as well Tim Hurd of the Bible Thumping Wingnut, and he's been patiently waiting, probably not trying to fall asleep, trying not to fall asleep because he's probably listened to my voice or JD's voice for like too many times on too many recordings, and I do that at least. I put on recordings I'm familiar with, and I as sort of a way to calm down and be like, I'll just pass out. So Tim, you're up 2 hours later over there on the East Coast, right? Or the Eastern, I should say, the Eastern time zone.
It's 10:24 right now.
Yeah, it's about to turn into a pumpkin, as they say.
No, I normally wake up around between 3:30 and 4. So tomorrow is worship, so I get to sleep until 8. So I'm good to go.
So the part of the reason that we're having you on, and part of the reason that this has kind of become an issue again, is because of the similarity between the penitent and, we would have assumed, forgiven and reconciled confession that you had offered to Jeff Durbin after I mean, what you mischaracterized some things talking about him, and then you had told him this was just done from the wrong motivation. He purportedly accepts your confession, forgives you, and as a Christian should. And unbeknownst to you at the time that this is happening, he's recording the phone call. Didn't tell you he was recording it. And then a couple years, literally years down the road, you have, like, if I remember correctly, just the slightest of criticisms about an apologetic method or something that he's done. And he anonymously releases the recorded phone call on a brand new YouTube channel. And then talks about it on a 3-hour podcast about, well, Tim Hurd is a slanderer and he's a this and he's a that. Everybody knows how Tim is. I mean, go over here and listen to him admit it in his own words. Am I getting this right?
Yeah. You've told the story to your viewers quite a few times. You get it. You get the whole timeline perfectly. Boy, Durbin and BTWN, we used to do podcasts together. He used to be on. I've got a clip I could play where he's promoting Bible Thumping Wingnut as one of our introductions. I sinned against Jeff Durbin, and I felt really bad about it because I didn't apologize for my doctrinal disagreements with him. I didn't apologize for the issues that I took. I apologized because my heart wasn't right. And so I wanted to make things right. And I literally did not talk about Durbin for over a year. And then somebody sent me a podcast where Durbin was on a secular podcast, very, very popular one. And instead of sharing the gospel with these atheists, every time the atheist said, you know what, those people are so wicked, they need to go to hell, or those people need to be put in jail because they're really bad. Durbin just said, the Old Testament, we agree because that's the Old Testament law. The Old Testament law says that these people should be put to death. And Durbin never shared the gospel. these atheists were serving it up on a platter for an opportunity for Durbin to share the gospel. And so I disagreed with that methodology completely and played clips of it. And it got back to Durbin. And I was actually at my very first Builders Summit, a men's conference that I had planned, took years to plan. Our very first Builder Summit. I'm at the opening day, and somebody sent me the video of my confession on an anonymous YouTube channel. And it ruined a big part of that event, and it ruined my next month. But yeah, the Durbin thing with me, I don't know, Dave. It amazes me that people can look at the content that's out there, that it shows what Durbin did, Durbin's own actions towards me, Durbin's 3-hour video to me, one guy literally in his basement doing podcasts. I had abused Durbin to the point where he couldn't take it anymore and had to do a 3-hour podcast about me. And in that 3-hour podcast, he said 219 times he made the same claims over and over and over again. You've abused me. You've lied. You've done this. You've done that. You've done this. You've done
What a
219
I'm sorry, I was
times.
gonna say it. It's like
I broke it.
Oh, yeah. It's like you've abused me. You said some stuff that I disagree with, or you said that I did something and characterized it wrongly. You've abused me. You've abused, like this kind of Christian interaction by way of narcissism. It drives me up a wall, and it really is, especially when you combine this with, because you're not the only one he did this to, right? People, when this happened, congregants or members or people around Apologia are coming out of the woodwork saying, this was done to me. This was done to me. This was done to me. And the thing is, he defends the practice, right? So he spent on this 3-hour podcast saying why it was okay to secretly record phone calls, not tell the other person that they were being recorded, and then beat them over the head with it later, as if somehow your confession 2 years prior meant you were forever a slanderer and an abuser. He slandered and abused me. You made one little light criticism, and out he comes with the fangs. Because the truth is, with guys like this, it's their reputation that is their idol. What people think about them is an idol to them. It's how they maintain supposedly their superior elder, superior status spiritually. And anything that gets in the way of that is worthy of burning houses down, burning any standard by which we would ever engage in Christian reconciliation and forgiveness. That's over, right? And the same is true. I'm going to say it. I know Jordan won't say it. I will say it. This is how James White approaches J.D. Hall. It's undeniable. You have James White on his program saying, I think Gavin Ortland is a good source for apologetics. You should definitely, I recommend him. I recommend Gavin Ortland. You should eat the meat and spit out the bones with Gavin Ortland. But to somebody who is much, much more doctrinally close to him,
let me back in for a second.
Like, we're dead or something. We're dead to him. So,
the definition of the term slander has really been stretched by James. So he really amped that up during the booze and tattoos thing, which I said almost from the beginning that I regret the whole deal, because had I known his son-in-law was in the middle of it, I legitimately would have not. I wouldn't have touched it. I didn't know the guy at the center of that video was his son-in-law. Or out of just respect for our personal friendship, I wouldn't have gone there. But then once it started, obviously, I'm not going to take your baseless accusations of slander. What was reported, and it wasn't reported by us, it was reported by Michael Markavage at the Christian News Network. We just republished it. Was accurate, and so it was. And I heard it today on X. Someone's like, "Well, that was slander." Hold on a second. What we reported is that they had a fundraiser auctioning booze and tattoos, And they said it was slander because, and this blew my mind then, it blows my mind equally now. That's slander because it was not a booze and tattoos fundraiser. It was an event that we held to raise funds for a church plant in Hawaii, auctioning a beer flight and body art.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, you just rephrased it. There's no slander.
Well,
You just rephrased it, and then engaged in emotional pleading about how much people in Hawaii need Jesus. Like that. That's not slander. Someone, chimed in and said, "Well, you guys lied about Nabil Qureshi." How? This was right around the same time, and it's like, how? Well, you said you didn't believe his vision that he had. That's not a lie. I'm saying I don't believe in charismatics'
my opinion.
vision. Like. Yeah, that's not slander. Learn what slander is. And that's the accusation that's repeatedly been made towards Tim. Well, Tim was slandering him. How? By disagreeing with his methodology,
right.
Whether it's the first time or the second time. The first time not, he needed a heart check. The second time, completely unrelated to the first time. How's that slander? So, okay, I think when they say slander, you understand these are people who've lifted themselves up as God in their own eyes. Mm-hmm. And so questioning them, critiquing them, challenging them, to them is blasphemy. But they can't say it's blasphemy because obviously the theological implications of that. So instead it's you have slandered.
You've abused me. You've abused me. You said something I didn't like. Right. You've abused me.
Hey, let me divert this conversation just for a second. This is from Ian Franklin on our X feed. He says, if you plan to go into the details, can you incorporate newly revealed information in your podcast? I like Protestia, as many of your readers do, for their impartial approach in the past, and sure would like to see that continue in the future. And this is from the the McGowan camp. Says Joel Webbon's historical narrative of 2025 versus his version from 2013, in which they've pulled screenshots. I assume it's from the Wayback Machine or something, in which part of his response seems to say, well, I wasn't ordained. It was a church.
Right.
It wasn't really a church. It wasn't officially Vineyard yet. There were no church, there were no elders, etc., making it seem as though he is somehow lying in this. Will we respond to that? First of all, I'm hesitant to respond to it because, again, it's undermining my own argument when I engage in this type of thing. It has been investigated by the only authority on earth that should have, or at least that had to have. It was done. But let's address it. Again, the milieu of the church planting phase during this particular era, everyone was a church planter. Everyone called themselves pastor, including Jeff Durbin when he was the pastor of a recovery group. All right, it's like as a glorified AA, he called himself a pastor of that. When you start dealing with local church ecclesiology, sometimes things get really hazy. For example, the Baptist tradition, at least in some circles, especially the Southern Baptist Convention, where you have an ordination, you also have a licensing. I was licensed to preach before I was ordained to preach. And then in some circles, there's several different ordination, one of them by the local church, one of them by a presbytery. And so, yeah, it gets blurry and hazy. But what Joel told me personally was, if you asked me at the time, this was Joel being candid, was I a pastor? I'd say, yeah, I'm a pastor. But looking back, I would say, no, that's his position. Yeah. But again, our position of saying this is a nothing burger. You're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill doesn't stand or fall based upon whether or not he was officially a pastor or not. It just doesn't. This is a who cares? None of my business. Mm-hmm. This is not a Steve Lawson situation. This is not this isn't a Johnny Hunt situation. This is not a Clayton Jennings situation. This is a single guy doing a Bible study who called himself pastor, had sex with
Right.
a congregant who was a peer of his age. He was very young and stupid, and confessed and brought this before his leadership, and they dealt with it the way that they dealt with it. And also, this isn't someone who had a kingdom like Johnny Hunt, or Jürgen Kanner or someone else who then could engage in a campaign of cover up and make heads roll, so to speak. He wasn't a king of a kingdom. This was a low-level dude, and the low-level dudes around him made what we all will admit at this point was a poor call. There should have been more action taken. Here's my question. I'm kind of curious from Tim, given his own background and his own testimony, if I want to know what his take on this is as it pertains to Joel Webbon. That's not why he's here. I mean, he's here to talk about the mistreatment that he endured on the part of Durbin and their unrepentance and their hypocrisy. But what does Tim think, given his testimony and Joel's?
Well, for those who don't know my testimony, 20 years ago, was it 20 years ago? Now it was 24 years ago. 24 years ago, I was a minister, and I fell into sexual sin and am disqualified from being a pastor. I'm not disqualified from ministry. I'm disqualified from being a pastor. And you know what? I told my story to everyone. I told my story to everyone who partnered with me on BTWN podcast, everybody who came to BTWN conference. I sat down, I called them ahead of time. You need to know this. And for those of us who have that story of moral failure in the past, eventually we have to ask ourselves, and it would be a whole podcast, when do we stop telling that story? Like,
Yes.
At some point, we need to stop. Like, forgiveness is forgiveness. It being dealt with, everyone who was hurt and harmed, they've all worked through it. When do we stop telling the story? Like, in a way, it can be a good story of forgiveness and, somebody repenting and turning from their sin and then moving forward in Christ and growing in Christ. That's a good story. But eventually, Anyway, let me go back. I told everybody my story, and nobody cared until somebody disagreed with me, or somebody disagreed with somebody who had partnered with me. And Jordan, you remember the 8-hour video that was made, The Death of Discernment, because all these discernment people who were partnering with Tim Hurd couldn't discern that Tim Hurd was disqualified from all ministry because he fell 20 years ago. Remember that?
Was it 8 hours?
It was 8.5 hours.
I think I made an appearance on that one.
Oh yeah,
Was that Servetus Diablos?
Yeah.
Who, by the way, has disappeared off the face of the earth. Like, he's, after that video, basically, nobody's heard from him ever again.
I think it's a test. It's a test of maturity for people who know, because a lot of people knew my story. A lot of people knew Joel's story, but never said anything.
Tim, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that was kind of one of my initial thoughts too. When I'm like, I need to know what's going on, and so I find out about the situation and some of the particulars. I was kind of, I don't want to say blown away, but I was surprised that 12 years later he is being proactive enough to tell every single person that he engages in ministry with that this happened. And I thought, on one hand, I appreciate the candidness and the integrity. On the other hand, there's something about that makes me uncomfortable. Is this our version of the Scarlet Letter? Is that what this is? Like, does our understanding of the gospel and concepts like forgiveness, repentance, and so forth, does that lead us to believe that as we introduce ourselves to others, it requires the confession of one or other particular sins so as to not hit people with our sin splatter. Like, obviously, if you've committed a sin against a child, and you, for some godforsaken reason, you're applying for nursery duty, you ought to lead with that. But should you have to lead with that a decade later? Are we being informed by our theology on what sin and repentance and forgiveness and gospel is, or are we being led by something else on that particular issue?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think if we have a biblical view of repentance and forgiveness and church discipline, right?
Yeah.
We're not telling that story to everybody.
Well, it's like I don't. The term that I hear is addicted, and I'm sure I've used that term before. Addicted. Addiction's a funny word. I was dependent upon prescription Xanax, in that if I stopped taking it, I might die. Like, I was super dependent on it to function, and that's a sin in of itself. I never should have leaned upon that instead of leaned upon Christ and all of that stuff. But from the very beginning, as I'm in rehab, and it's like, okay, you're supposed to say, my name is Jordan, I'm an addict. I never did that crap. I'm not an addict. And the reason is because, like, I'm not branding myself with that. I spent the last 10 years telling people to stop calling themselves gay Christians. What are you calling yourself a gay Christian for? Like, if what you mean is you're a Christian who has struggled or still struggles with the sin of same-sex attraction, don't identify by your sin. That's awful. You're a Christian. Romans 8:1 is true. There is therefore now no condemnation for those of us who are in Christ Jesus. Period. Said and done. That's all there is to it. And so even today, like, when we did that first video with David going on 2 years ago, and I said, I really don't struggle. Once it was very clear what my problem was, in recognizing that what had befallen me was because of this prescription drug. Although I should have known it long before. It's not a drug you take to think clearly. Once that I understood, and I realized how it had harmed me, and I had used it to harm myself. There was no more longing or desire to take that drug or anything. So it's like I dealt with seizures, but I was never like, I wish I could have some Xanax. I would have run from it had I seen it. Like, literally probably ran as though it was a copperhead or something. Point is, someone had commented on that video. They're like, well, you can never, you're going to fall back into that again if you can't admit that you're an addict. And it's like, okay, those God frees indeed. So, like, my theology, I know the psychobabble you're telling me, I understand that. Ironically, I used to be an LLC addiction counselor. I understand the argument. But God has freed me. I'm not identifying by that. So then, and I think that's biblical. I stand by that. I recognize the danger of, like, any substance that, whether a doctor prescribes it or not. I have to be careful about that. Like paranoid, careful about. That said, why is it if someone has committed a sexual sin that then they have to identify with that forever? And so it's like, okay, well, it makes total sense that if you're going to a church in view of a call, that's what we call it, to possibly take a church as a pastor, that you're definitely sharing that. But with everyone else, all the time, like, if you go to Joel Webbon's website or Tim Hurd's website, should up there underneath the title of the website on the welcome page an asterisk? By the way, I have committed some type of sexual sin while clergy. there's something about it that just strikes me as profoundly perverse. Profoundly perverse.
I think it's because people in general don't realize the seriousness of their own sin. They think that they're not as bad. And if you're going to lead me, you better be better than me.
Yeah, exactly. I said that earlier today. Actually, now that you're bringing that up, I basically argue that part of the reason that people like to put pastors up on a spiritual pedestal and basically act like there's an elevated set of standard for sin when somebody's a pastor or not is because now we can push off the actual work of ministry onto those guys. We're off the hook for doing it. He's got to uphold this standard of holiness, and nobody's ever going to be looking at mine. I'm off the hook for it. And if he offends me or something or does something we don't like or makes us look bad, we can discard him. And I'm safe over here with my sin that only I know about. Nobody else hears about. It's just for me. They in other words, they like this. They like this separation between ordained ministry and regular believers in the pews. And the thing is, the scriptures do not support this. Like, there is no single qualification for an elder other than apt to teach that doesn't apply to every believer. Like a guy like me who's not a pastor is not permitted to not have my household in order or not correct with gentleness or, not be respectable or hospitable like that. I'm still supposed to do those things, but as soon as we say, well, there's a special higher level of sin qualification for this, then as soon as somebody violates that, and particularly the overbroad application of above reproach, right? So somebody can say, well, it says to be above reproach, and I have determined that above reproach means thus and such. Therefore, so-and-so is biblically disqualified because I say so. And I'm like, these rules aren't for you to apply to other believers over the internet. They're to pick your elder. They're to hold your elders in your church accountable. They're not for you to hold me or whoever accountable over the internet.
Tim had pointed out that nobody had a problem with his testimony until they had a problem with him, and then it gets brought up. Yep. I tell you what, I've really not heard, in so far as Joel's concerned, people that support his ministry be like, I've not seen any swooning. I've not seen anybody clutching pearls or falling on fainting couches because of this.
You know how big of a hurdle that should be to get over for people accusing him over Twitter? It should be a giant hurdle.
If you subtracted the number of people complaining about Joel not being qualified for ministry 2 days ago from the list of those complaining about it today, you'd have the same figure. I mean, like, or you'd be down to zero, whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's those who are just using this as a bludgeon to say, see, we told you so. But what I'm seeing from his critics is the same thing that I complained about from not all, but some of Steve Lawson's critics. And that is, this is a tool for you to beat someone because you already had an axe to grind to begin with. Now, Steve Lawson didn't have very many personal enemies, but he was a part of the patriarchy, right? So they're using this as a bludgeon to attack him or to attack his theology. And you know what? This should be uniting everyone who truly loves the gospel to say, sin's not something to beat someone with, ever. It's just not. Go back to complaining about Christian nationalism. And I think that's why we feel.
We can't forget, and this is why I think it relates to Lawson. We can't forget that the people complaining the loudest about this, the ones who are the most offended, the ones spilling tons of digital ink over this right now, not a single one of them has been sinned against by Joel Webbon. Not a single one. All the people that have skin in the game that he sinned against, that he admitted he sinned against, every one of them is supportive of him. And it's like, does that mean nothing? Like, do we not have an obligation as believers to defend the certitude of repentance and reconciliation and forgiveness among one another. They're not even talking about it. They don't care what his wife thinks. They don't care what this woman thinks. They don't care what his elders think. They don't care about what his church thinks. They only care that here is evidence of this guy's supposed disqualification, which we already knew because we already hated what he was doing online. And I just I can't get there.
You know,
refuse,
and I
won't, you know?
when things unfolded with me, especially when it came to the false accusations, you know, anonymous people, we still don't know who they are, making police reports, people from all over the country calling every member of the church that they could find to stir up as much hassle as they could. And then, you know, just all the false accusations, I had to just tell myself, okay, the people who love you, the people who hate you are going to believe it, whether it's true or not, because they want to believe it. The people who love you are going to love you, whether it's true or not. And I think Joel's in the same situation, and I want to comfort him in this, that I don't think this makes a bit of difference to anybody who is undecided on the issue. This just allows an opportunity for your enemies to have one extra thing to shame you over. That's what it will do. That's what it will accomplish. But people that are like serious minded and just truly impartial look at this and go, that's a real shame that happened. That's sad that happened. I think it says a lot about the state of ministry back then in that specific era. I think it says a lot about the fragility so far as sin is concerned in the hearts of every man. But it's also a pretty good story of perseverance, and it's a pretty good story of the consequence of sin too, that it will it will lead you decades down the road and continue to cause you problems later. And so there's a lot of things we could point out about this, like to young men, like, look what happened, it's not worth it. But you know who I felt real compassion for was his wife, because it's not as though she didn't know it. Obviously she did. She has a relationship, a positive and affirming one, with this other woman. Mm-hmm. They've, as you pointed out, been able to be reconciled. But it's like, you know, why does this shame have to be thrown in her face again? Because what?
Because
some little effeminate guy wants to run around exposing things, like, for what? For what reason? Is it in order to protect the evangelical online reformed fiefdom of a particular warlord, like Apologia or, you know, James White or Doug Wilson, or the very few number of people who had this thing? Like, is it worth it? It's just like, we're human beings. We have real relationship. We have real wives. This is a serious issue dealing with human beings, and you're gonna dredge this up from the past and then beat somebody with it. Come on. This is sick.
Yeah. And it's and the thing that, I mean, I think there's another component to this a little bit, in that I think that a lot of the people that are, it's a shortcut, right? We're all tempted in doing polemics and discernment and all that when we have somebody that we are trying to identify their theological error, their danger, whatever that happens to be. Man, it's real convenient when you know, the cops come along and say Robert Morris diddled a girl back in the day. It's like, oh, now I don't have to spend any time explaining why he's a false teacher. It was done for me. You know, there can be a shortcut to this, right? And so all of us are tempted to fall into this sort of trap where
here's
it's like,
the difference,
that guy
though.
that I hate is
here's
a bad guy, you know?
David, here's the difference, though. You and I don't know if you have, I've written about Robert Morris. I know him as the guy who teaches very false things about tithing in particular.
Yep.
I know him as the first guy to rehab Mark Driscoll. I know him from the Fighting for the Faith sermon reviews of this guy. I've written about him. The difference is, so we've done the work, and so yes, it does make it easier to go, okay, well, now look. I don't see that these guys ever did this work with Joel Webbon. Of all of the things that I've heard about him from the dividing line, from Phoenix, I've not heard any substantive arguments about his positions. All we've heard is he's bad. They haven't even begun to try to explain to us why he's wrong. Tell me why he's wrong. Defeat the argument. But so with what happened with Tobias, if you're familiar with the story,
they can't even defeat the arguments of Corey Mahler. How are they going to defeat the arguments of Joel Webbon? It's
exactly right.
It's laziness and it's a lack of theological acumen, and they know it, which is why they're afraid.
And the crazy thing is, I think they share 99% of his views. They would deny that, because they make much of anything that could sound slightly anti-Semitic or whatever. But we've defended James several times on this program or the program that preceded it on issues related to race, where he's being accused of being a racist for careless things that he said that were taken the wrong way, or frankly, a few things that were not taken the wrong way. But we had to interject ourselves and be like, it's not racist to point out facts, man. Like the issue with the black young man on his dash cam. It's like, what he said was true. It's politically incorrect. So like we defended him on that. So they share the vast majority of his views. But I have to believe that one reason they've not even tried to present any theological arguments against Joel is because they don't have any. They're actually in agreement with him. So then what are they mad about? That's why I lean back towards, the work I produce at Insight to Insight to say, I think that people are protecting the marketplace. That they know that they're competing for donors and supporters and givers. They know that's what they have to fight over. And that's sad to see.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. So I think Tim has said goodbye as far as I can tell. I'm looking at the little preview and he's not there anymore. But is there
let's give him a minute to come back. I was hoping that you would finish with Tim. I did have a few questions for him as it pertains to this. But David,
can I just reiterate, by the way, I think this is important because the people that I've been back and forth with online, they're supporters of what we do here. As much as I could consider folks I never met and things friends, and like, these are guys I respect that have been back and forth. They've argued their points and things. I want to reiterate that my point, and I think your point as well, is not to say we agree with Joel Webbon's theology. We agree with most of it, I would say, but not, there are things we disagree with, but to defend the integrity of Christian repentance is essential. It's essential. This goes to the core of how believers are to love one another. When we say that I have no skin in the game. I'm across the internet. Don't even know any of these people, but that he's got the people closest to him saying, we forgave him a long time ago. He repented of this a long time ago.
The church that issued the letter.
Yes.
The church that issued the letter is like, it's done. They didn't even make an accusation. They're like, would you consider it? Think about these things. Then they came to the conclusion, you know what? We think this matter's settled. And then they invited him to come back to preach. Like everything is good there. And so what this is, people need to understand this. It goes back to the issue of the gatekeeper, which I've talked a lot about in the last few months. The concept is there have been gatekeepers in the past, but now there's no gate to keep. They talk about James White. He gave a big, caution to Joel Webbon, as though like, what is Joel taking his advice these days? Not to platform quote unquote JD Hall. You know what I did? I had no idea before I popped back up if people would throw rotten fruit at me or what. I had no idea. But I thought, I want to share some thoughts. I started my Substack, and the next thing you know, I've got thousands of followers. I've got hundreds of paid subscribers. People do want to hear what I have to say because I just have some things to say. And then, you get thousands of followers on X, and people are like, "Hey, I'm glad to see you." And then some people want to beat you with your sin or whatever. Some want to make false accusations, like Durbin did to me in regard to the lawsuit brought by Planned Parenthood attorneys. That's really weird to see someone for end abortion now or whatever. Is he really trying to beat me with a lawsuit brought by Planned Parenthood attorneys? Like, that's a weird flex for that guy to do.
It's personal,
but
obviously.
So anybody that wants to be platformed, you go on to X and immediately you have access to 1 billion people on the planet who want to, if they want to hear, they can hear. You can start a Substack, and then it's like 4.5, 5 billion people can access your Substack. And that's really frustrating to guys who've been keeping the gate. So it's like, what does even platform mean at this stage in the game? What does that mean? Platform someone? Everyone has a platform.
As if somehow we have a printing press back in the back, and I'm like, well, I'm going to print JD's book now. Like,
so my podcast is nothing but me reading my articles. Sometimes I'll be like, I'm ad-libbing, but like it's 99% me reading my article. But it didn't cost me anything to start it. Like I didn't have to spend a single dime to start my podcast. It's like Substack's like, hey, you want a podcast? Yeah. I want to beam it to Spotify. Didn't have to pay a dime for that. So everyone has a platform if they want one. It's really stupid these days to complain about platforming people, even if it's Andrew Tate. It's like they're not giving him a platform he would not have had otherwise. He would have had, he already has platforms. You can't take them. I'm sitting there in this thread yesterday talking about this, and Jeff Dornick, he's got a tech startup, Silicon Valley tech startup called Pickaxe. And I'm like, hey, Jeff, can I have a platform? He's like, yeah, bring it on. Like, they're free. They're passing out platforms everywhere. What this is an attempt to shame the Christian, to use our virtue against us in order to shame us so that we self-censor, so that we deplatform ourselves. That seems awfully satanic. And so what's clear is that,
like, let me see if I can hurt this guy enough that he won't. Well, he won't be able to emotionally handle being out here.
Tim said that he's disqualified from the pastorate, but not from ministry. And that's a distinction that he's made. And I do very much think that is a valid distinction. There are many people who believe that the Apostle Paul was estranged from his wife and that he would not have been qualified to have been a pastor, but he was not. He was called to be an apostle. Point is, no, you don't think so, David?
Well,
I said some.
Paul described himself as an elder. He said, as your fellow elder, right? He addressed other elders.
Well, actually, yeah, no, so
presumably
that's actually
he
a fair
would
point.
He would have said he meets the qualifications, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point, I suppose.
It just returns us back to the doctrinal center of what pastoral ministry is.
I do think there's a distinction between the ministry and the pastorate. I don't care to do ministry. That's me, I guess, deplatforming myself. I was given an opportunity this week. I think you saw that, David, to fly down somewhere and to speak to a church. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. But I recommended someone who would. But the reason why, other than it gives me PTSD to even think about that, is because other than I don't want to. I don't want harm. I don't want the hassle that church is going to have to go through when they announce it. So it's not worth it. I'm perfectly happy doing something else.
You're basically applying an above reproach adjacent kind of a thing to this. There's a practicality to this. Like if we're going to call this man to be a pastor, and he's going to get beat over the head with this.
It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
it's
a church
not worth
might say
to the church.
You can't be above reproach. Which is their right to do.
Like,
That's
and
that church's
I
right
know
to
that
do.
I know that this pastor, his attitude was, I don't care, brother. I love you. I stand by you. This is bull crap. But it's like, I care about you though. So like, I'm not going to do that. But it's very clear though, from what James has said about me, not only would I be disqualified from even various forms of ministry, I don't know that there's a lesser form, but like more obscure kinds of ministry.
Ordained ministry in a church is, you know, it's a
He's
different
made it very
category.
clear.
Yeah.
I'm disqualified from tweeting, from being seen in public, from sharing opinions, and others have said as much. Well, you shouldn't share any opinions. You can, and it's what they think they said. They said this about Webbon or Lawson in the last couple of days. I'm trying to explain to this person, like, okay, being disqualified from ministry is not you have to crawl under a rock and die now. That's not how we treat
even permitted.
Christians.
Like biblically,
But they're like, no,
you are not
they
allowed
said
to stop doing Christian ministry. You are a child of God. You must do Christian ministry.
This individual said in response, like they clarified, no, I think that if you have fallen in such a way, you can go to church, but you can't speak. Like even like you have to be quiet even in Bible studies. It's like relegating someone to seen but not heard is, I want you to understand how fundamentally anti-gospel that is. That's not unchristian. That's anti-Christian. That's godless. There's nothing Christian about that. Tim, here's what I was going to ask you. What are you thinking when you read those comments on X from some of the more hardcore fans of those guys who at this point still allege that he's done nothing wrong as it pertains to you? Like I saw a comment where it's like, well, it's not like he was Tim's pastor. And so, but, you know, of course I chimed in and I'm like, but he did do this to his actual congregants also, like plenty of times. But does it feel surreal at all? Like, does it feel like you live in an alternate universe where you're like, are you kidding? And my question is not just that. Does that feel like as weird as I think it would? And also, what do you think's going on psychologically with these people who would defend this despite the record-setting hypocrisy of it? Like, what's going on in the psyche of someone who follows someone else to this extent that they would let them get away? Like they're not removing the plank from their eye, right? But they're trying to do eye surgery on the speck of someone else's. What's going on there? Because it strikes me as kind of a phenomenon.
He's muted.
You're still muted.
It's the same thing that happens in politics. Like Trump can do nothing right for people who used to think logically, right? And now Durbin can do nothing wrong, even when you show him sinning in a video clip, point blank. Like somebody was defending Durbin, and I shared a link with him to a video that demonstrated Durbin editing a video of me to misrepresent me. I mean, I have over 1,000 videos on YouTube. Durbin needed to discredit me and say I'm a liar, and he dishonestly edited a video where I said something, and then right after it, my next sentence was, I corrected myself. Durbin cut it off and then said, see, Tim's lying. I sent that to somebody who was defending Durbin, and his response was 300 words. It was this ginormous response defending Durbin, and it was like, you have no comprehensive skills. You like, this is as plain as day.
Tim, when they send out, when let me back up. So let me preface my question by pointing this out. The clip that James showed of me on Webbon's podcast, where they took like a minute and a half of me saying, listen, you know, they're not notable. Steve Lawson was not notable. James White, Doug Wilson, they don't have the influence people think that they do, and their influence is dying. Now, my overall point was that would include myself too. That would include Paul Washer and Bodie Baucham. In the world of 7.5 billion, 8 billion people, we're a tiny little niche. Our world is much bigger in our heads than what it is in reality. I mean, our niche, our corner of the universe. And it wasn't a slight on those guys, like, you know, it wasn't an attack. It was just an observation. And I've been pointing out that because of what I call the democratization of ideas, the democratization of all things, because of everyone has a platform, those who also have a platform no longer have a monopoly on the market. So influence of the big guys will be dying from here on out. This is why somebody like Matt Taibbi or Glenn Greenwald can make a bigger difference in journalism than Sean Hannity on Fox News. He might be Sean Hannity, he might be on Fox News. Nobody really cares, but they're listening to certain people on, like Theo Vaughn has 22 million followers on his Substack, right? So that was my point. He took this clip from a YouTube channel. Now, I saw that clip go up on YouTube, and I recognized the person who made the video from a comment he made on X. And his comment on X, in which Webbon had shared our episode, he just said, "This is lies," and it's like 4 exclamation points. So it's like, good argument. Okay, this is lies. Okay. Then I see a YouTube video of an excerpt with the same title on the video, whatever the comment was, like, "This is lies," or "JD Hall lies about James White." Well, it's not a lie. Again, just because you dislike my opinion doesn't mean I'm lying. Just say you don't like my opinion. And I noticed that it had like 12 views. So this is a random kook from goodness knows where, who is willing to defend James White to the death, apparently. And he has a YouTube channel that no one listens. He had like 29 followers on X. But what it accomplished was James White then uses his clip. I cannot even fathom the dopamine explosion in that guy's head when he saw that James White read or showed his video on his program. That would have been the biggest day of that man's life. I promise you, in his obit, it will say, "James White played his video on the dividing line." What's the possibility, Tim, that some of the people engaging in this type of sycophantic behavior are doing it because of the social rewards they get from that dopamine burst as they see someone they admire likes their comment, RTs them, QTs them, or even the Shangri-La, the Holy Grail, having a clip played or discussed on the dividing line? Is it possible that it's this bizarre psychological thing that's happening from this Pavlovian head patting, this carrot on a stick response? Are we seeing people, like, I'm trying to not use an ugly phrase. Are we seeing people get off on this? Like, do you think that's what's going on? Is that why these people do it? Because maybe, I don't know, they'll get a like? Is that too simplistic?
I don't know. Twitter X has become something that it wasn't a year and a half, 2 years ago. I literally was not paying attention to anything going on Twitter. And until people started tagging me and saying, "Isn't this what Durbin did to Tim Hurd? Isn't this what?" So I kept getting tagged. So I'm like, what's going on? And I come back, and there are actually tons of accounts that now aren't fans of the guys in Phoenix at all. And most of them, there are real people, but more than half of the people you engage with now are anonymous accounts. You have no idea who these people are.
Well, Tim, your YouTube channel I've always admired because you've always had like such good audience numbers. Like you what you did on YouTube before you started, podcasting the Bible thumping wingnut, you had a real way with video and having engagement. And then you became the Bible thumping wingnut. And looking back at your heyday back when you had, well, you still are. I don't mean any offense. I'd say the same thing about myself. We're like we're micro pseudo celebrities, right? Like we have a following. There are people who will refer to themselves as our fans. I get that every day. I'm one of your biggest fans. I'm like, that's weird. Like, I raise chickens. I don't have fans. I need some friends though.
I saw that.
Surely you've experienced, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've experienced people doing things or saying things just to get a pat on the back from you, right? I mean, I know I've experienced that. Like, people just want to be rewarded with an attaboy. And I think that might be some of the reason that people go out of their way to attack. They go out of their way to be the minion of someone, so that when James White lowers his scepter, his fanboys go on attack because it just that like on X means so much to them. Am I reading into it?
You're talking about fan people. I think their motivation is that they agree with that person and they want to contribute to the conversation and point something out, whether it's valid or not. They're gonna try to support the people that they love.
Yeah, maybe I'm too skeptical. Are you familiar with, and I don't know how you say his last name, but Chris, I'm pretty sure you are. Honotes. I wish I could remember how to spell his name. Chris, David, help me out.
Yeah,
Where would I know?
I don't think I'm not sure if I've ever heard of
You would know him
but
because he's a clinger. He clinged on to Tony Miano really hard in the day. He was like Tony Miano's little sidekick back when Tony Miano was I love Tony. Back when Tony was a micro niche celebrity. And what I've seen from this guy, Chris, is that.
Chris
okay. Yeah. I know who you're talking about now.
So I know of him. He clinged to me for a little while, but I've seen him go from one micro celebrity to another, where all he does is hang out on their threads. And I'm judging from afar, I guess, but that dude loves a head pat. He lives for the head pat. And over time, I've seen the notoriety of whoever he's clinging on over the years become a little bit more famous. And it's like he's able to ascend the ladder of whatever micro celebrity he's hanging on. And then it's kind of like he'll ditch them and then go to somebody on the higher rung of the ladder. That's my observation.
I could give you some names on that, but I'll just give you one last name that'll really get you excited as you refer to your memory banks. The Hardings. They were those people who
platform grifters. That's what they are.
Yeah,
it's platform grifting, right? So they'll pick up on whatever theology is popular in the moment and adopt it until they see a better opportunity elsewhere, and then they leap over to a different theological camp.
I look at somebody like Chris, and like I'm pretty confident he just wants to be recognized by his whoever he happens to be a fan of this year. And so I suspect that one of the reasons it is so easy for these guys to just point and then be attacked is because of this weird thing that's going on in social media. Like, I think if it could be analyzed by, psychologists, they'd be like, okay, here's what's happening in the human brain to make this happen. But I tell you what, some of the frustration from James, because you can tell he's angry, right? Like, you can tell he's angry. He's very frustrated because they can't summon the posse that they used to. And probably part of that is X has changed. You know, the ecosystem has changed to some extent. But it's kind of weird to see them ratioed so terribly. Like, any time I've engaged Jeff Durbin, I'm crushing him on the ratio, like bad.
Yeah,
And
see, that's different. That's different from a couple of years ago.
isn't it though?
Yeah. You know,
What happened?
You know, if you ask smart AI, you ask AI or X's smart thing. What is it, Grok, or I don't know how to say it. If you ask them, Jeff Durbin versus Tim Hurd controversy, they get it right. That AI will tell you everything, perfect timeline, everything that Durbin's done that's wrong, the whole controversy. It'll get it right. That is an amazing. One of the reasons is because it's been reported on the internet so much. The people who I'm looking at right now, it's been documented. What they've done has been documented to such extent that it's like, all you got to do is Google it. You don't even have to watch Tim Hurd's videos or Jeff Durbin's videos. It puts it in a nice, Dave's got it up there, but it's amazing how, so I don't know, maybe, I don't know who are these accounts? Who are all these accounts that agree with me who weren't around a year and a half ago? I
guess you and me, yeah, you and me are in the same boat. And what Grok, the other day, you know, I was playing around with the same feature, and it's like, you know, JD Hall, and it lists these controversies, and it says that it is rumored that, it phrased it like, it is rumored that now he has more prominence and power than he had before.
It's because
and this is why they call him
listening.
They said this is why they call him JD the White, and I'm like, okay, this is getting weird. But part of it is, I think, is these guys move to the center. X is obviously not a place for the center. Maybe they would be more comfortable on Reddit, you know, I don't know, or Pinterest or something. So, you know, part of that I think is going on, but also I think that we're seeing what I've been talking about at Insight to Insight in the populist social revival, a move away from a half dozen big celebrities to 45 smaller ones. And it's just kind of like, you know, when television started, programming had to appeal to as many people as humanly possible, because there's only 3 networks, or in the beginning just 1, and then maybe 5. But then, you know, with cable and with satellite, all of a sudden there is room for a bizarre niche. There's room for scary stories. There's room for true crime documentaries. There's room for, you know, Martha Stewart baking a pie. When, you know, 300 million people don't want to watch that in America, but, you know, now there's 500 different channels that you can watch. So all of a sudden there's room for that. So everything has become much more personalized, and people can seek out their specific interest that they really want. And so this is happening in evangelicalism. I think this is overall a good thing. If I could move right before we close out of here, if I could ask both you guys if we could move this conversation to a little bit more of a spiritual realm. This is the question I'll pose you. All of us have been in this game for a long time. Tim, on one hand, it feels like you kind of came along recently, because I was here before you on this scene anyway. But at the same time, when I think about you, in my head, that was the good old days. Like, so on one hand, it's like you haven't been around that long, but on the other hand, we've been in the foxhole together quite a few times. And 10 years on the internet is like 100 years in real life, right? We're old timers.
When did you start your first podcast?
probably about the same time you started doing your YouTube stuff. I
2012.
don't mean to say that. Yeah, I don't want to say that. Yeah, maybe you've been around as long,
But we didn't know about you
right?
until
I don't think
the
when I say
theonomy.
that, I mean, I don't think you came into our orbit. I know you were doing your stuff, but I feel like you didn't come into our orbit until what, 2000?
No, you didn't come
16?
into my orbit.
Sure, if you're the center of the universe. Point is, we all have scars. We've been through it, right?
Yeah.
I don't have the desire to fight in the trenches anymore. That's why what I do at Insight to Insight is called, broad spectrum intelligence. I'm looking at the big picture. I want to talk about big issues. I wrote about that in the Polemics Manifesto. I'm like, I got to get out of the trenches. We all do. Look at the big picture. It's a big world. We got to have big plans and not just fight over microaggressions from micro celebrities and micro niches online. That being said, if you could share something maybe from your heart, both you guys, to help us as fellow Christians and our followers, listeners, how can we ascend out of this controversy? How can we avoid being bogged down with this giant pile of horse crap and do something that's meaningful? Because, at a certain point I realized a couple years ago, even before Xanax, I didn't sign up for this. This is not why I do this. Being in endless, stupid controversies is not what I signed up for. It's not what I want. What I want is to have an impact for King Christ. I want to make a difference in people's lives. But it's like, I refer to guys like Neil Shinvey as the devil's rodeo clowns. I feel like our goals, our aspirations are making a grand difference in the world for the sake of Jesus Christ, doing his will on earth as it is in heaven, and seeing his kingdom come. But, then the 25th different controversy arises this week, and I have to argue about whether or not Beth Moore passed gas on the third row of church this morning, and what does J.D. Greer think about it? So it's easy to get bogged down with this stuff. At the same time, it's hard to let go because, Jeff Durbin, he wronged you so badly. How do you let go of that? Today, William Wolf tells me that Chris Bolt he's one of the good guys. And I knew he's come around since he was writing treatises about Karen Swallow Prior and why I was awful and why she's good. And I'm like, man, I don't want to let go of that grudge, but I guess I'll have to. So from the perspective of both of you, who I don't think want to engage in this type of brawling, what do we do to rise above this and to make an impact on the world so that we're not just beating this horse for the 500th time in this little tiny corner of the internet and fighting those old battles?
I'll go first, Dave. It's a real simple answer, JD, is to realize what matters and what doesn't matter. Tomorrow is Sunday. I'm going to church. I'm not thinking of any of this stuff that's happened to me. I'm not thinking about anything. I'm going to church to worship the Lord, to be ministered to, and to minister to others, to shake hands, to give hugs, to ask people how they're doing, to pray with people, pray for people, and sit in a pew and be ministered to and hear from my local pastor. That's what matters. I'm sitting next to my wife. I'm rubbing my wife's shoulder. I'm connecting with my wife during the sermon. We're looking, we're agreeing, we're being blessed and ministered to. Our presence there is an encouragement to everyone in church. And their presence is encouraging to me. And my pastor knows me. My pastor knows my sin. My pastor's forgiven me. And he's there to give me the word of the Lord tomorrow. And that's what really matters. We've been through it. There's a lot of people who've been through it. And man, I don't know how some people, they just fire up the video every day or every other day, and they're arguing about the same thing, everything over and over and over again. And I'm the kind of guy, like, if I've got a point to make, I disagree with somebody, I'll make a video, and then there it is. It's the video. It's like I said it, and you guys do that too. I mean, you write articles, and then it's there for everybody to see. That's my position. That's how I view that. And like, then put it in perspective. This is the internet. This is the internet. Who, like, that's when Durbin was coming after me so hard, and I kept asking him, what's my sin? What's my sin? This was the second time. He says, oh, you're at it again. You're at it again. What's my sin? I kept saying, what's my sin? He goes, oh, you know what you're doing. Let me talk to your pastor. I'm like, one, Marcus Pittman already knows my pastor because he shared the phone number and had people call my pastor a year ago. So you could
right. I forgot that.
You could ask Marcus Pittman who my pastor is, or you can watch my podcast because he's been my co-host a couple times. So I wouldn't tell Durbin who my pastor was. One, because he already knew. Two, this is the internet. Like, you're gonna bother my pastor who has 5 children and a church, and he's the only staff person? You're going to call him up and complain because I made a video about you? Like, really? It took a time to put it all in perspective, but I go to a small church, and those 60 people are more important than the 100,000 people who watched my YouTube video last month.
I want people to understand this, that when Jeff Durbin says, I want to speak to your pastor, do you understand that's a threat against your pastor? Because here's what he's going to do. He's going to demand that his pastor agree with him. And if he doesn't, he's going to put your church on blast. How do I know that? That's what happened with Tobias and Joel.
Yep.
This guy in Germany says, discipline your church member. Joel's like, whoa. Like, A, not your concern anymore. B, we're dealing with it. Did I say B or D? We're dealing with it. And then Joel was attacked. If they can't get the answer they want from your pastor, if they can't leverage him to attack you, to join him in attacking you, they will attack your pastor. So if somebody's listening to this and they're gonna cut a clip out, cut this one. That's about the most satanic antichrist thing I can possibly imagine. What they're going to do is they're going to attack a local congregation and its pastor, because the pastor won't join them in their vendetta and jihad against someone who has criticized them online. I rebuke that in Jesus' name. May the Lord rebuke them.
And most of the
to bring that drama upon a church, get out of here with that.
When the pastor doesn't even know who they are or what the controversy is, like they like, and they don't have the time for it or the energy for it.
I think they would find it pretty hard to believe that your pastor doesn't know who they are, right? I mean, it's like, well, of course they do. That a lot of people don't understand. That's what's going on with the we want to talk to your pastor. Is that if they can't attack you, they will attack them. Well, his pastor doesn't even care. He goes to some kind of cult. And then the next thing you know, this poor guy who's trying to keep his church together, who's trying to serve the Lord, then has to worry about heat brought on him from some kind of stupid internet skirmish. Grow up, dude.
It's incredibly narcissistic to even think that should be a thing. It's like this local yokel pastor who doesn't have the influence I have will of course be wowed and awed by my magnificent online presence. I mean, clearly he knows who I am. I mean, he's going to have to he's going to have to bend the knee to the great Jeff Durbin, when I call and tell him about Tim Hurd giving me a hard time on YouTube. It's so ridiculous.
The last time James brought up my elders, did his elders know? Maybe we should. All right. I had mentioned this to my pastor, and I'm like, listen, and he subscribes to my Substack about twice a week. He'll text me about, something that I had written. And
my pastor's eldest son wears this hat. Literally.
I told him, I said, listen, just so you know, like, I'm not going to bring any heat down on you or anything else. But he's always been so kind, but he is very pastoral. He's very dignified, very reverent. But I cannot fathom the response that he would get from my pastor, because he is very much a no nonsense. I don't know you. Why are you, like, grow up, young man? Like, so I'm not worried about my pastor or the elders in my church. I'm not worried about them at all. And they, like, obviously they know who I am. They knew who I was before I went, but I'm just a normal guy. But they're not about to let somebody out there in the internet land beat up on me. And that's one of the reasons. The first thing I really knew about Joel, paying attention to the Tobias controversy, and it was very clear that Joel's attitude about the errant church member in his congregation was one of protection. He cared about him pastorally. He's like, first and foremost, I'm here to serve and to love and to shepherd him. What's your business with him? And my pastors have that as well. I'm not going to let that type of garbage, come in on them. David, I'll throw it to you and say, and everything that you've learned, you and I, from all of our experiences, you and I've talked about this before. We don't want to get bogged down with this stuff. We want to have a big picture idea of what we're going to do and where we're going to go for the cause of Christ, broader issues. How do we avoid this? Because I don't want to do this episode next week. I don't want to do, and
you didn't want to do
I didn't want to do it. No, I texted you. I messaged you tonight and was like, I don't want to do this.
I'm like, it's too, it's too late. The thumbnail's already out there. We're going. So two things to double down on what Tim said, and really kind of what we're talking about now. Like, there should be a love that we have, and there really is. In doing this kind of work, the love is for the church, and there should be a way that we're consistently trying to engage with our church on a local level. There is something unique, and I mean, Christ is really, I would argue, present in a way that he's not with internet skirmishes when we're ministering the local church, which needs discernment as much as any other place. And that discernment can be in the form of, letting our pastors know about something potentially, or defending them when they do the right thing, and our maybe more ignorant church members are giving them a hard time, coming to their defense when they're right. But local ministry matters a lot. And then the other thing I would want to point out is basically, since I wound up, sort of getting Protestia and all this sort of dumped in my lap, so to speak, a few years ago, I kind of made the determination that, and this isn't unlike anything anybody else has done, but I kind of made the determination, okay, I'm going to try to the best of my ability, with the people out there that I might have serious disagreements with, but who have an orthodox confession of faith as far as, believing the real gospel, as far as I can tell, I'm never going to shut them off. Like, I'm always going to have the open channels. And if they say, hey, I can't handle that, I don't want to talk to these guys, I'm going to block them, whatever. But it's always going to be, even with the people that are driving me up a wall, it's still going to be, yeah, you can DM me. Of course, we'll talk about this. I'll tell you straight up what I think. And, it's, in other words, it wasn't about, I'm going to go to war for a tribe, and in the last few years, it's been, okay, you're either a Christian nationalist or you're anti-Christian nationalist, and everybody's being pressed to tribe up and push into one of those tribes. And I'm like, but at some point, if we really think that the people on both sides of this are believers, at some point, and you've said this many times, one of the sides or both the sides are going to be corrected, or this is going to work its way out in the doctrine and the theology over time. And I don't want to be there at the end saying I made an enemy out of everybody as because I'm convinced of my prescription here, my formula. I torched everybody on the way there. Like I want, like the Christian nationalist guys that are wrong on some things in terms of magisterialism and things to be able to still work with us and be our friends and brothers when they figure that out. And maybe the guys on the other side, they're a little too pietist, they're a little too ecclesiocentric, I would argue, for what the Bible teaches, to be able to correct that and still go forward in brotherhood. And I think we all have to sometimes, and this Joel Webbon thing is a good example of this, step back, relax, put things in perspective, and realize tomorrow there's going to be some other fight. Tomorrow there's going to be some other issue. Do we want to be brothers when that happens or not? Or we can all get emotional about it and chop each other off at the legs and tweet each other into a million little pieces to the point where there's no unity at all. And so that's something I'm constantly saying. Protestia needs to return to that. We need to transcend that kind of stuff. And the only reason that I would ever want to do a show about the latest thing going on, online, is because there's doctrine to learn here. There is edification that can come from this
and
if we're careful.
I'll point out we did not discuss much tonight permanent disqualification.
I'll get there.
Okay. I'll share three things, and let me preface it by saying I'm definitely not the person to ask. That's why I went last. It's hard to avoid some of the old controversies and some of the new ones, but I texted my dad back and I'm like, yeah, you're right on that. And he said, I've found that the best way to avoid getting into a fight is not to be anywhere around when they start. And which is wisdom. Sometimes, we feel like, well, I was drug into this fight. It's like, yeah, but you were at the bar at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're where the fight was gonna break out. And so, I'll consider that admonishment to myself or to anybody else. It was difficult in this case because we knew it was coming and felt maybe obligated to weigh in a little bit. The second thing is, I told Joel, don't take your hand off the plow. Back to my concept of the devil's rodeo clowns. I think the devil absolutely orchestrates things to distract us from the mission. We have a mission. These guys are like mosquitoes. They just need to be swatted and just keep moving, keep going forward. Does this with Joel Webbon move the needle at all on anything? And the answer is no. The people who hate him have one more reason to hate him, but they didn't really need a reason, an extra one. They already had plenty. Those who support him will support him regardless of this, because we recognize that even if that was a judgment call we wouldn't have made 12 and a half years ago, it is what it is. And we have to move on with him, just like we move on with Charles Stanley, just like we move on with Daryl Harrison. It's just the way that it is. And so if we realize that fights are not always glorious, sometimes they are actually a distraction from getting our work done. And our task by our taskmaster, who is Jesus Christ, is we have to get the work done. And we can't do that if we're incessantly defending ourselves in issues that we're not going to change anybody's mind, and the controversy is not going to change anybody's mind. So just get the work done. Whatever the Lord has given you to do. And the third thing is, so like I work finance for a day job, and I've been doing that, all this time. And I really like my job. And, I was telling a guy at work the other day, we were working really hard to get caught up on some things. And I said, the thing is, it's like farming. You will never get caught up. The farmer thinks to himself, I got to do X, Y, and Z to get caught up. You're never going to get caught up. You will not. Because pigs keep on crapping. It's just going to keep coming. So it's kind of a lie we tell ourselves that one day, once we wrap this up, we'll be done. Nope. You go home when it's time to go home, because if you go home when the work is done, you'll never go home. That's the way controversies are. It's not just this controversy. They just keep coming, and they come and they come and they come. And if you think, well, I got to deal with this, guys, like, obviously I wore myself out. Don't do that. Turn it off. And Tim's advice was great. Tomorrow's Sunday. Go to church. Take a breath. I like the way Tim said, well, that's the internet. That's not real life. It really isn't real life. And so, if we take the time to deal with every single controversy, all you're going to deal with is controversies. And I'm excited about Protestia because God has given us such a reach. The website is such a great resource. Our followers are just fantastic people, those who support us on Patreon and share our stuff all over the world. I mean, listen, every single day, rather renowned influencers are sharing our material from Protestia. It is the libs of TikTok of the Christian world. And so I think it's awesome. But I want to see us be more evangelistic, not just to point out bad theology because it's funny, which it is sometimes, in a sick, twisted sort of way, but because we have news that is emphatically good. And the emphatically good news is that Jesus Christ became man, planted himself in the womb of an embryo, took on flesh, lived a life for us, earning all the righteousness that we could ever need, because we're not righteous by ourselves. We're terrible. We're sinners. We're lost. We're depraved. We're messed up and sinful. And yet God, because he is gracious, because Christ had flesh that could bleed, then bled for us, and he died for us. And God heaped upon him all of our sin, all of our shame, all of our guilt, all of our sorrow, all of the terrible, wicked, awful things on him. But it's not just that Jesus took on our sin. The scripture says Jesus actually became our sin. He became sin for us. He who knew no sin became sin on our behalf so that we could become the righteousness of God. And then there is therefore now no condemnation for those of us who are in Christ Jesus. And that goes for Joel Webbon. That goes for you. That goes for everyone. That's the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's why it's disheartening to see Christians act as though there's not a solution to sin, because there is. And it's not necessarily a solution that will magically fix all the damage that it causes this side of eternity. But if we let the damage that it causes on this side of eternity undermine our appreciation and exaltation and heralding of the reward that we will get on account for being in Christ one day, we have lost the plot. And so, those three things are what I would add. I just want to thank everybody for hanging out with us tonight and listening. And, don't be an agitator. If you want to cut clips up and throw this out there, I can't stop you. Whatever, go right ahead. But recognize that this is not anything that we should be spending the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days on. Honestly, this controversy was such a small matter. Ultimately, this should have been a 5-minute use of time on all of our parts. And so let's give it the attention that this controversy deserves, which is no more than what it's already been given.
Yeah. Now, before we go, I don't know if you saw me put it up there, but a little plug for Polemics Catechism is now available, free for insider supporters. And
Sweet.
yeah, it's ready to go. It's out there for insider supporters. You can get it free on Patreon. You can jump on Patreon and pay $7.99 if you want to, but it's also free for insider supporters as a download. The print version is on the way, as well as the Kindle version on the way. And yeah, I mean, it was it was a full revamp, if I do say so myself. And so
Right. It's the old Baptist catechism that I had put together years ago that was endorsed by James White, as a matter of fact, on the back cover. But every catechism question has an explanation of, if you understand this, you will not fall for this heresy, this heresy, this heresy, or this heresy, with a glossary in the back where you can look up what are these specific heresies. It gives you the actual technical name, because catechism is the ultimate bulwark against heresy. So I hope that you find it to be very useful.
Yeah, it's set up basically. If you get the Patreon version of this, it's set up where each of the catechism questions you can just click on it or tap on it, and it will go to the referenced heresy that question addresses. So it should be really convenient, really, really helpful. And I know some of you want the print version, so you can, maybe do it on a Bible study or something like that. It's on the way.
Yeah.
Well,
thanks to Tim Hurd for joining us. Thanks everybody for listening in. We're going to try to do this once a week. Probably be back. This week was a little bit different, but we'll see you, I think, on Thursday after the Bulldogmatic Bible study. If you're a member if you're a Protestia Insider, you can join us in Insider Roundtable.
I'm calling the Insider Roundtable now.
What you can stick around after the roundtable and watch us do this podcast live and see our interactions. So another reason to become a Protestia Insider. Also subscribe at Insight to Insight. Tim, do you want to plug your stuff?
No, I have one closing statement, and that is, you two guys, you write more articles than I do, but I can still beat you on a bike. Just want to point that out.
Touche.
Why are you laughing?
Touche.
I don't know. I'm not going to.
I mean, I thought you were straight, but I didn't know. You should probably start advertising that.
All right. Moving on.
Cut it out.
Thank you to JD. Thank you to Tim Hurd. Thank you to everybody that stayed around so late. Keep following Protestia, protestia.com, for all of your latest in Christian polemics and discernment news. We'll talk to you again next time. As always, Semper Reformant.